segment of Expert Insights hosted by the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Today we are privileged to host Professor Mick Moore, who is a political economist with extensive research interests in Asia as well as Africa, especially in Sri Lanka, Taiwan and several other countries. He is a fellow at the Institute for Development Studies and will be presenting and discussing the revenue crisis. Professor Moore, thank you very much for visiting the Institute of Policy Studies. We were discussing the revenue crisis that Sri Lanka is currently facing. So let's start off with what does it mean to be in a revenue crisis and how did we get here?
Well, the revenue crisis, I suppose the most precise definition is that on current projections, the government is in a situation where it's raising so little revenue that it may not be able to meet its international debt obligations to commercial lenders within a few years, and that it might find it increasingly difficult to refinance its current debts because the potential people likely to loan money to the government of Sri Lanka fear that it can't repay. And if it gets in that situation, that would be quite extraordinary, in fact, for a country of this size and a country with this relative economic success in recent decades. Well, we got here in a very strange manner. Sri Lanka was historically a country where government used to raise quite a lot of tax revenue relative to national income or GDP. And there was a change around 1990 where the ratio of the taxes raised to the GMP just started to decline. And it's declined very, very steadily, almost year on year since that time, such that before that the government was raising about 21, 22, 23% of GDP in tax revenue, and it's now about half of that figure, that's to say 11%. And I should say that figure is surprisingly low for what is now a middle-income country with a fast-growing economy.
What can the government, and including the private sector as well, do to rectify the situation?
Well, at one level, this is a very easily solvable problem. There is nothing to stop government taking one of a very wide range of measures to increase taxation again. And there is nothing to stop the private sector complying with that, because Sri Lanka is now not a high tax economy. Frankly, most people in Sri Lanka, and especially people with significant incomes, are very much undertaxed by any kind of standard. Any country in the world, they would be paying more tax. And the steps would really be quite simple. In the first place, there are an awful lot of people who should be paying tax who are not paying tax. This includes many highly paid professionals like engineers and doctors and lawyers, especially those who are paid in cash, who simply don't declare their revenue for their income for income tax purposes. It includes an awful lot of companies who benefit from a very wide range of frankly unjustified tax exemptions, especially tax exemptions that were originally intended to attract more investment, especially foreign investment. So technically there is absolutely nothing to stop the income tax department, the customs department or the excise department from levying a reasonable amount of taxes. The problems are frankly that people don't want to pay and governments are very reluctant to ask them to pay.
I'm sure you're quite aware that tax reforms tend to generate a lot of political pressures. How can the government balance these pressures and deal with the political economy associated with tax reform?
Yeah. Well, the government has got itself in this position, especially the current government, and I would give the current government credit for understanding the problem and wanting to do something about it. But for a range of reasons, including historical reasons, the government has not really been able to explain very clearly to people and to the private sector that there is a problem and give them a clear trajectory for solving that problem over a number of years. And what the government has tended to do is to look around for revenue and suddenly introduce new revenue-raising measures without much consultation and without warning people, and then suffering the political backlash, which is an understandable political backlash because people really don't know why they're being asked to pay this money, and this all comes completely out of the blue. So it is really important that the government actually try to have a longer term strategy and move in steady steps and explain to potential taxpayers why they're asked to be paid, why they're being asked to pay more revenue.
Finally, to put this in context, could you give some examples of where developing countries have successfully implemented tax reforms?
Yes. Actually, formally speaking, in terms of the tax reforms they've implemented, Sri Lanka looks fine. Sri Lanka introduced, a long time ago now, the value-added tax, which is quite a complex tax to introduce. It has done a range of other sort of formal tax reform measures, but the point is that there has just not been the organizational push to make these things actually work. And what is needed is just much more intention seriously to raise revenue and encourage and support the revenue-raising departments to do that. So you don't really have to do anything very radical. There are a wide range of things government could do. But the most important thing is actually widening the tax net and bringing more people into paying taxes. And I would say, incidentally, and this is really quite striking for anyone who's known Sri Lanka over a long period of time, Colombo in particular, and the greater Colombo economic area, is now really quite a prosperous part of Asia in many cases. And there are many people with quite high incomes and many people who are living in really very desirable residences which pay nothing or almost nothing in terms of taxes. And this is frankly an anomaly. Almost anywhere else in the world, if I were to own a nice 3-bedroom apartment in the capital city, I would expect to pay something on this. Colombo is really one of the exceptions, and that is something that I think something should be done about.
Thank you very much, Professor Moore, for visiting the IPS and for this interview. We hope to see you back soon.
Thank you very much.